Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the ranking member's comment earlier and just note, not only did Mr. Wolf serve unlawfully as acting Homeland Security Secretary and as the chief architect of the unlawful family separation policy, which literally kidnapped children from their parents, he also unlawfully defied a congressional subpoena in September of 2020 and refused to testify before the House Homeland Security Committee. It is just shocking that my Republican colleagues who claim to believe so strongly in congressional oversight would invite a witness who has so brazenly violated the law and so flagrantly violates our authority. But Mr. Reichlin-Melnick, I want to turn to you to discuss the issue of parole. The use of parole has become a big topic among my Republican colleagues. Can you discuss the history of parole and its bipartisan use over the last 70-plus years? And where is the authority for the executive branch to use parole?
Parole has been part of the immigration law since 1952, so it has been around for decades. And for many years, especially prior to the passage of the Refugee Act, parole was the primary way by which the U.S. admitted refugees. So, for example, from 1962 to 1969, more than 690,000 people came to the United States under parole from Cuba through various different parole programs. Since then, Republican and Democratic administrations alike have used parole to allow people to come to the United States in various categories that fit the national interest. These have been nearly every presidential administration, including the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and even under the Trump administration, tens of thousands of people were admitted under various parole programs that were then extant when he took office.
Some have criticized the Biden administration for its use of parole, saying it's not being done on a case-by-case basis. Would you agree with that statement? And if not, why not?
I don't agree with that statement for the primary reason that I think they misunderstand what case-by-case means. A case-by-case adjudication just means taking every application on its own. It doesn't mean that you can only give it to a few people. And in fact, in 1996, when Congress passed IRA, which included the case-by-case requirement, the Congress actually rejected an amendment which would have made parole into a much more narrow program. And I think the best example of this is to sort of look at this as a metaphor. If I want to create a scholarship program, and I say, this scholarship program is open to every child whose parents earn less than $100,000 who can show compelling need for it. That is case by case, because each student has to individually show that they have a compelling need. Whereas if it just said, this program is open to every person who earns less than $100,000, that would be categorical. There would be no case by case involved.
So it appears that the administration is merely saying that certain categories of people are eligible to be considered for parole. Is that correct?
That's right, and I think very similarly, the wet-foot, dry-foot parole program that ran from 1995 to 2017, under which about 40,000 Cubans came in through the border, that was also a similar circumstance.
But they still undergo a case-by-case determination to see if parole is appropriate.
That's right, and every parole memo has required it to be case-by-case.
And both Republican and Democratic administrations have made use of categorical parole programs in the past?
Well, I wouldn't call them categorical, but I would say parole programs that were open to certain individuals, based on, for example, their nationality or their job.
Did the Trump administration use parole?
Yes, I think the most prominent one is the Military Families Parole in Place program, which operated under the Trump administration.
Now, the Trump administration continued the use of parole as part of the Cuban Family Reunification Parole Program. That sounds like a categorical program that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have complained about.
Yeah, and Cuba has in particular had multiple parole programs in use for their nationals over the last 20 years.
Is this parole program similar to other family reunification parole programs recently announced by the Biden administration for Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras?
My understanding per DHS's announcements last week is that the new parole programs will be virtually the same as the Cuban Family Reunification Parole Program.
And can you explain how those parole programs work? Who is eligible, and are these individuals still granted parole on a case-by-case basis as the law requires?
Yes, so the family reunification parole programs are open to individuals from certain countries who have family members who have pending immigrant visa applications already. So they've been approved for a visa, but they're just in a backlog. And so there, if those individuals are invited to apply for the program from the National Visa Center, then they have to submit an application, they have to go through a vetting process, and then it is in the exercise of discretion of the United States to determine whether or not to admit the person through this parole program.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Tiffany.